Chapter 7. Counting and displaying of results.
In this section, we will discuss both counting and displaying of results.
This upcoming step is very important and extremely sensitive.
This process may take some time to complete. Now, is there anything that we should bear in mind before counting commences?
Certainly, as the counting process may take some time, it is important to consider a short break before proceeding to open any ballot box. Also note, in the case of harmonized elections, since 3 ballot boxes are to be counted for the 3 separate elections, the presiding officer may set aside a short break, say of 10 to 15 minutes, before proceeding to unseal the next ballot box and commence the counting process of the next election.
For each separate election, the opening of each ballot box and the filling in of its V11 calculation form should be done together. Once that is completed, then the presiding officer may move to the next ballot box. It is important for the presiding officer to inform those present that once a ballot box is open for counting and before the results thereof have been finalized and captured on the V11 form, then no one will be allowed to enter or exit the results counting room. During each break, at least 2 polling station staff and 1 police officer must remain to ensure the complete security of the ballot boxes. Counting and verification will be done at the polling station.
The results counting process is one of the most important and significant steps. Charlene, can you now briefly describe for us the main steps followed here?
Certainly. After the polls are closed, all polling staff will now assume the role of counting officers. The counting process is outlined as follows. Step number 1. Ballot paper account after closing of poll and before unsealing the ballot box.
Step 2. Opening the ballot box.
And step number 3. The ballot paper verification process.
Step 4. Allocate votes to respective candidates.
Step number 5. Presiding officer reviews and finalizes decision on ballot papers set aside for his or her review.
Step 6. Bundle the votes for each candidate and count them.
Step number 7. Fill in the V11 form.
Step 8. Paste the single-sided V11 form at the entrance of the polling station. The process is now complete.
And that sounds absolutely amazing. Now we are going in to explain each and every single step in greater detail.
Certainly.
Step number 1. The presiding officer must complete section C of Form V11. This is the ballot paper account after closing of poll and before unsealing the ballot box. Here we will calculate the total number of ballot papers that we expect to be in the ballot box. Note that we do not open the ballot box yet. Instead, we rely on our calculations based on the number of ballots we received, how many we issued to the voters, and how many were cancelled. Also, we take into account how many postal ballots were received, that is, if any were received at all. Please do not forget that before opening the ballot box and commencing the counting process, the presiding officer may give people a brief break. Furthermore, before counting commences, the presiding officer must also ensure that all present sign the pre-count declaration form, which is PE 2005/28, in order to acknowledge the verification process. Step number 2. Opening the ballot box. Remember that before the padlocks and seals are removed, the presiding officer must announce to the election agents and observers the seal strap numbers and invite them to inspect the seals should they wish to do so. The presiding officer should also remind all present at the results count that it is not permitted for anyone to disclose to any third party outside the counting room the results of the polling station before the official V11 form has been posted at the entrance of the polling station. This is to avoid incorrect information being disseminated before the results have been fully tallied and verified. Before the start of the count, make sure that you unseal the ballot box by removing the 2 padlocks. Afterwards, remove the seals by using a pair of scissors. Care must be taken not to damage the ballot box.
Step 3. The ballot paper verification process.
Count the total number of ballot papers in the ballot box.
Confirm whether this total matches the total that you have calculated earlier on in Section C of Form V11. If it does not match, then reconfirm your count.
Check for the presence of your polling station's secret mark on the rear of each ballot paper. If any ballot papers do not bear your polling station's secret mark, then set them aside. After setting aside all such ballot papers, check whether their serial number is within the range of papers that you've received. If any unstamped ballot papers are not within the correct serial number range, then they should not be counted and should be put aside. Now, just to clarify, all postal ballots must be stamped with that polling station's secret mark before being placed in the ballot box, and thus none of the postal ballots should appear as unstamped. Find the total of the remaining unstamped ballot papers. In other words, unstamped ballot papers that are within the correct serial number range, and enter this number on Form V11. Determine whether this total of unstamped ballots exceeds 5% of the votes cast. If it does not exceed 5%, then these ballots are included in the count. If they do exceed 5%, then the presiding officer must afford the opportunity for all election agents present to mutually agree to accept or reject all unstamped ballots. If no such agreement can be reached, then all such unstamped ballots must be excluded from the count. We now proceed with all the ballot papers that have been accepted to be counted.
Step 4. Allocate votes to respective candidates.
Ballot papers are examined by the counting officers, and where the intent of the voter is clear, then the ballot is allocated to the respective candidate. Note that typically a separate stack is created for each candidate. If on any ballot paper the intent of the voter is not clear, then that ballot must be put aside in a separate stack for the presiding officer to examine and decide. Each ballot paper that is blank, namely the voter has not made his or her mark, must be placed on the rejected vote stack.
Examples of a valid vote, examples of an invalid vote,
Similarly, any ballot marked for 2 or more candidates must also be a rejected vote.
Step 5. Presiding officer reviews and finalizes decision on ballot papers set aside for his or her review.
After all the ballots have been sorted, the presiding officer will now go through the ballots that have been placed on the separate stack for his or her review and final decision. The presiding officer will go through each such ballot explaining his or her decision. For all ballot papers rejected by the presiding officer, in other words, whose markings were deemed to be invalid or unacceptable, the ballot will be endorsed rejected on the rear of the ballot and will be placed on the rejected stack as per the decision of the presiding officer. If, however, an objection is raised by an election agent and following discussion the objection is not withdrawn, then that ballot must be endorsed rejection objected to on the rear of the ballot and must then be placed in an envelope marked rejection objected to. This rejection objected to envelope must then be placed inside the packet containing the rejected ballot papers. None of these rejected ballots will be counted. For all ballot papers whose markings are accepted as valid by the presiding officer, the ballot will be placed on the appropriate candidate stack in accordance with the decision of the presiding officer. If, however, an objection is raised by any election agent and following discussion the objection is not withdrawn, then that ballot paper must instead be endorsed acceptance objected to on the rear of the ballot and then placed on a separate stack for each candidate. Such ballots are ballots that have been accepted by the presiding officer as valid. However, they have been objected to by an election agent, and note that such acceptance objected to ballots must be placed in an envelope and included in the total count of valid votes for each candidate on Form V11. At the end of the count, these acceptance objected to ballots must be placed inside an envelope marked acceptance objected to. This acceptance objected to envelope must then be placed inside the packet containing the accepted ballot papers. Step number 6.
Bundle the votes for each candidate and count them.
Please note that acceptance objected to votes must be counted but must not be bundled with the ordinary votes. For each candidate, the valid votes must be bundled into groups of 10 and then into groups of 100. In other words, 10 groups of 10. In a similar manner, bundle the rejected vote. Now count the number of valid votes for each candidate.
Also count the number of rejected votes. Step 7.
Step 7. Fill in the V11 form. Fill in the section D of the V11 form with the valid votes obtained by each candidate. This total is inclusive of the acceptance objected to votes for that particular candidate. Fill in the rejected votes. Calculate the remaining fields of the V11 form. The V11 form is signed by the presiding officer along with one electoral officer serving as the witness, and the election agents are then requested to write their names, political party, and designation, as well as place their signatures on the V11 form. Several copies are filled in by hand and signed in the same order by the same people. Note that a number of original copies must be provided as indicated on the V11 form as specified for each type of election. Over and above the copies specified, it is advisable for the presiding officer to also keep an original signed copy for his or her own record.
Also note that the V11 form that will be posted at the entrance of the polling station must be single-sided. Step 8.
Paste the single-sided V11 form at the entrance of the polling station. Step 9.
Preparing electoral material for the transportation to the ward elections officer. Electoral Act, Section 64(2).
Place inside an envelope the following items and mark it as envelope A. 5 original duly completed polling station returns form V11, stapled together the duplicate of the following pro formas from the protocol register. PE 2005/1, Register of Assisted Voters, Section 61B, Item 3.
PE 2005/1A, Register of Persons Assisting to Vote.
PE 2005/4, Register of a Persons Denied to Vote.
PE 2005/30, Presiding Officer's Register of Complaints Received During Poll.
PE 2005/32A, Gender Participation Polling Station Return Form.
PE 2005/2, Indemnity Forms.
Place inside another envelope the following items and mark it as envelope B. Voters roll,
Badges for polling officers,
badges for election agents,
original polling station protocol registers, and any exercise book used to record activities at the polling station.
completed and signed Declaration of Secrecy Forms V19.
Note that envelope A must not be sealed inside any of the ballot boxes, as it contains forms that will be required during the results aggregation process.
Now for each election, place the following items in their respective ballot box.
The original duly completed polling station return form V11 for the relevant election.
Ballot papers for their respective election, used, unused, spoiled, unnumbered, mismatched, and all counterfoils.
Any used seal straps that were used to seal a ballot box and afterwards cut to unseal the box must now be placed inside the ballot box that they were originally used on.
Envelope B must now be placed inside the ballot box before it is sealed. Recall that this envelope contains items such as the voter's roll, polling station protocol register, recording officer's journal, and so on. In the case of harmonized elections, there will only be one such item for all 3 elections. Thus, envelope B must be placed inside the local councillor ballot box before it is sealed. For this reason, it is recommended to process the local councillor election results last.
Seal each ballot box prior to leaving the polling station. Election agents should be invited to inspect the seals and take note of their serial numbers. They may also place their own seals on the ballot box, Section 64(1)B, provided the gap has adequate space to do so without damaging the ballot box. Note that once the ZEC official seal is in place, then there is limited space in the gap for placing additional seals. Finally, do not forget to prepare or package all other remaining items for their return. For example, Pack away the presiding officer's seal, the secret mark, stamp pad ink, all ballpoint pens, rulers, and so on into the supplied cardboard box. Ensure that no flammable material such as acetone is leaking. If it cannot be resealed, then it must not be placed inside the cardboard box as it presents a fire risk. Also, do not return any unused matches.
Also, ensure that gas lamps are properly switched off.
Remember that under harmonized elections, the above counting process must be repeated for every concurrent election. The counting of the results is now complete at the polling station. Remember that the winner of a local council election will only be announced later on at the Ward Collation Centre after all the ward's polling station returns have been gathered.